at this point, the demo gives you a couple hours to play around. So you're able to type Orca help, and that's going to give you a full list of commands. Orca is an interesting environment in that it is a really, really good way to build with Mac OS, and it's a really, really ephemeral forward way to use CI/CD. So it's a little bit of a learning curve for some people because a lot of folks are coming from a bare metal world or a VM world where there's long-lived VMs and they're using scripts to manage that or to clean up after this. This really starts with the idea that you shouldn't have to do all that work. You should simply let the system create the resources at the time you need them for your build and then throw them away. That's part of the power and the convenience of Orca, and the speed of it, quite frankly, is the fact that it's saving you a lot of that configuration and setup time. If you look at the list of things you can do with Orca, there's a lot more to sort of experiment around with in this demo. You can create and list and do all the normal user creation steps, but there's a lot to look at on the node. There's something that, if you're familiar with Kubernetes, is worth playing around with after you finish the basic iOS build, and it's this sandbox capability. It requires a license key, but what it would let you do is designate this node as a native Kubernetes resource. At that point, you could actually go through processes and steps that are outlined in the Orca documentation, where you could use kube control commands to do anything you would normally do in Kubernetes. Again, in the demo, this is restricted, but in a normal Orca cluster, you have both a Orca side of the house, which lets you do the Mac OS specific things, and you have a Kubernetes side of the house, which lets you do any kind of pod or container that you're normally used to engaging with. This can be super helpful if you have, command and control structures or artifact repositories or other systems that you like to run alongside your builders that can live side by side in that environment, so that you don't have to have a build farm and then also spin up a separate server farm for other things. You can look at the VM commands. There's the concept of attaching a disk. A lot of folks have a need to persist things between builds. Attached disk is a great way to manage that. And then a wide array of commands. One that's pretty interesting here is scale up or down. That lets you basically specify in a Kubernetes-like way the number of pods to scale up to, 7, 8, 9, and it'll start scaling across the cluster. You can also do live commits and snapshots. Now, commits and snapshots in Orca are kind of an interesting thing. It's sort of a Docker Kubernetes mentality of saving state. If you commit, you're basically saving changes to the container or the base image back to the original base, and that changes it. If you want to open a VM, put a lot of tooling into it, and then have a different version of that VM, you do a save, and that save gives you the option of having a second image now with all the things you changed in it. So then you can have a clean image and a modified image. You can repeat that process over and over and have as many images as you want. So if you're used to using stuff like Terraform and Packer, it's a good way to kind of have multiple sources for description for automation in the future. Again, I highly recommend going through a lot of these commands and seeing what you can do, and kicking around the Orca environment to make sure you understand it. And once you get your head around that and like all of those things, we would love for you to pop on over and talk to us about getting a full cluster.